John, I mean, at the risk of upsetting the scripts that you had in mind for this conversation, 2 points on the content. One, when we talk about governance, we have talked 90% of the time in sort of transatlantic context. We haven't, I think, explored enough the points that we brought in at the beginning of a conversation. How do you give China and others a bigger stake, and then how do you make them behave responsibly? Okay. But also, before we get to, if we get to the conversation, one point on the transatlantic governance, structure of transatlantic governance. You used the word rogue ally.
He did.
Randy. And of course, what you have in mind is not really a rogue. What you have in mind is a misbehaving ally, somebody who takes
a misunderstood ally.
I'm sure that's the way it's seen in places. But what you have in mind is a misbehaving ally, somebody who takes advantage of the membership and then free rides and doesn't contribute to the global goods. What we haven't thought through carefully enough is the actual rogue ally. When it's somebody who actually goes against the interest of a community and possibly against another member of the community. And my question to you, and this is really a whole other ball of wax, and I'm not sure when I get into it, is should we start thinking of that scenario? Mm-hmm. Is there a risk that if the crisis continues on its current path and if it gets worse, that we might have tensions of a sort that we haven't seen possibly since 1974, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, re-emerge in parts of Europe? And if so, do we have the mechanisms to deal with a blue-on-blue conflict? And what are the lessons we had learned from 1974? By then we had NATO, and we had already a case of essentially a blue-on-blue nearly in an alliance. What are the lessons we learned from that crisis?
General?
Well, again, using an example from the past, when I took office as chairman of the military committee, we had every month 120 air incidents used by aircraft of 2 allied nations in the Aegean, both flying with hot armed missiles. We got it down in 3 years' time by using some confrontational charm to 6. That 6 is still six too many. Yeah. But the reduction rate is substantial. By that, I'm trying to say I could not think of a real conflict which could become hot between European nations. We have no reason to speak about other rifts in the alliance, so the transatlantic danger doesn't exist at all.
No, but among members of the alliance, there's, as we speak, a debate between over the drilling rights off the coast of Cyprus and noises by the Turkish government about rearming and strengthening naval presence.
But I think we have the instruments in place, and if there is the political will, we can bring them together to find peaceful solutions. So that I really would rule out. I cannot believe in something like this. What I fear might be a realistic option is that nations, for the one or the other reason, erode the consensus of the alliance because they give their narrowly defined national interests a priority. That might happen. Whether a nation does not participate in something, that is a case of normalcy in the Atlantic Alliance that we have seen again and again. I think it's wrong. I think if someone agrees to something, as we have seen in the Libya case, where we had a vote of 28 votes in favor of the operation, but only 5 participated, that is something which I would see as an erosion of the transatlantic alliance. And there we have to think through what mechanisms we can find. In the earlier days, it was easier, since then we had a strong leader who I think was able to enforce cohesion, because one could use the instrument, if you do not go along goose-stepping with us, you may suffer some consequences. And it worked. And that brings us back to something which some people will regard as not democratic, but we apply the same rules in families. If the children do not obey from time to time, you have to introduce some sticks and carrots. And the same is true for alliances. And that, I think, is to some extent missing at the moment. I blame a little bit the United States of America. And they got tired of asking again and again for leadership, for followership, for contribution. And they got tired of taking the burden on their shoulders and then in reward being criticized by their allies. So that, I think, brings us back to a discussion we had this morning. If we want to keep this transatlantic alliance alive, we Europeans have to understand that it has to be a two-way street. If we want something from the Americans, we have to be prepared to give something to them if they need our support, in which category ever it might be.